Hey guys, I have an awesome conversation for you lined up here. I'm here with journalist Rania Khalek. Rania, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you, Kyle?
I'm good. I'm good. So there's a lot of stuff I want to talk to you about. I want to talk a little bit about the election. I want to talk about the fact that you were just in Syria, which is really badass and also slightly crazy.
Really, it's really beautiful this time of year.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Civil wars are usually gorgeous. That's usually the case. Um, and perhaps we'll touch on Trump's picks and some other stuff too. But so I was just talking about this the other day with my friend. Now you don't have to share who you voted for if you don't want to, but let me just give you what my line of reasoning was in the election, and I'm curious what you think of it. So I mean, I despise Hillary Clinton.
I'm with you, man. I'm with you.
I despise Donald Trump too, clearly. I'm
with
lucky though. I happen to live in New York, and since I'm in New York, I I was able to vote for Jill Stein and feel fine about it because I know that New York was going to go to Hillary Clinton anyway. But I know that there are some people, I don't agree with them totally. They try to do what I think is a full false equivalence and say, like, well, Trump and Hillary are basically equal. They're equally bad. So, you know, even if I was in a swing state, I would vote for Jill Stein or I would sit out or I wouldn't vote at all, you know, whatever. What do you think about that? Are you in the camp of they were equally bad, or are you in the camp of they're both bad, but Trump's a little worse, or Trump is a lot worse, and if you're comfortable sharing it, tell me who you voted for and all that stuff.
Well, so totally, yeah. As for the camps, I went back and forth, and it depends what you're talking about. Like, Trump is far worse on domestic policy than anyone could possibly imagine. I think it's kind of the worst case scenario than Hillary Clinton would have been, and there's no question about that. And I mean, I don't think anybody who's arguing otherwise, that's just silly. But there are some issues on foreign policy, and it depends what region of the world and exactly what you're talking about, where it's a toss-up. But it's overall, generally speaking, Hillary Clinton definitely would have been better to have than Donald Trump. And I think I was someone who during the primary went back and forth on this issue. And, I really hated Hillary Clinton so much. I was like, if she wins the nomination, I'm not going to vote for her. But then once she did win the nomination and my anger subsided about Bernie not winning it, my position kind of became like, I'm just going to kind of back off until the election's over. And that's sort of what I did. I just, the couple months before the election, I just backed off because I think Donald Trump is, a lot worse. As for who I voted for, I live in Virginia, and I left for this foreign reporting trip like a month before the election or several weeks before the election. And so I just didn't end up voting. And Virginia was a place where she was going to win. She was way, way far ahead. Although once it came down to it, I think she was only 5 points ahead. But when I left, she was way, way, way ahead. So I mean, if I had lived in a swing state, I would have just sucked it up and voted for her. But that said, I agree with you about the false equivalence, but I think it's really silly that so many hardcore Clinton supporters and a lot of Democrats were spending their time lecturing and yelling at anybody who didn't want to vote for her, like they were obliged to or something. First of all, it didn't win anybody over to their side just because they wanted to vote for, to people who were voting for Jill Stein. And then second of all, Hillary Clinton should have been gearing her campaign towards getting her base out to vote. Instead, she was trying to reach out to Republicans.
Yeah.
It's absurd. So yeah, that's where I stood on all that.
Yeah, I lost a lot of respect for a lot of people who I previously put in the category of, generally on the right side, because there were people who, it drives me crazy that this was a thing, but there were people who actively supported Hillary over Bernie. And that, okay, if that's the case, just be honest with yourself and say, I'm not really a liberal, I'm not really a progressive, I'm kind of like a centrist / corporatist, Republican light kind of person, because you're talking about a candidate who, I mean, her record speaks for itself. She supported NAFTA, she supported TPP, she voted for the Iraq War, she, pushed for intervention in Libya, the Patriot Act, which just rips up the Constitution. It's not the fact that some people thought that was a question and they thought they were on the left kind of drives me crazy, and still to this day it drives me crazy. Now I say, the Republicans ideologically, I just totally disagree with them. I think they're so far outside of the realm of respectability and common sense and logic that it's ridiculous. But now I feel the same way about like half the Democrats. And it drives me crazy.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. I feel like there's, especially now that like the election's over, and I just got back from like Lebanon a few weeks ago, and people are still like Democrats are still acting like it's a primary season.
Yeah.
Like they're back at like they're still talking about why Hillary. Like I love that you always tweet this. You're always tweeting Hillary Clinton lost. Like didn't lose because of this, and this. She lost because like Bernie Sanders sucks. Or I mean that's like literally that argument is still being had. Like what the hell? Move on.
Yeah.
Like it's time to deal with like going after Trump, not you yelling at the left.
Yeah. That makes me want to immediately start talking about Russia because it's like there's this giant like movement now to deflect and obfuscate as to why she lost, and it's gotten to the point where they're so up to their eyeballs in this that like they're willing to escalate with Russia and add more sanctions against them. Like the sanctions over Crimea, I'm actually fine with, and I think that's like a debatable thing. But the sanctions from anonymous CIA sources stating that allegedly Russia hacked the DNC emails and then gave it to WikiLeaks, it's like, well, even the framing on it they do is fucked up, where they say, oh, Russia hacked the election. Russia hacked the election. No, they didn't. Like that implies they hacked the voting machines and they turned it over to Trump. The strongest claim you're making is maybe they got the DNC emails and gave them to WikiLeaks. And in that case, I think you should up your security just for common sense reasons. But we should have seen those anyway. I've said that I think DNC emails, RNC emails, even the emails of people in campaigns who are running for president, I think that they should be subject to the same kind of transparency laws that you see in government. And the fact that now you have people on the left who act like, Julian Assange and WikiLeaks are bad, it's like, okay, well then just be consistent then and say you also hate Chelsea Manning and you also hate Edward Snowden.
They do. This same crowd of people does hate Chelsea Manning. They do hate Edward Snowden. It's the same. I mean, these are the same centrists that you're talking about. And with the Russia stuff, I mean, I think there's something really interesting happening right now, where if Hillary Clinton had won, there would still be this thing about Russia going on, I think, but it wouldn't be so intense. Like, this is partly because that's the trajectory that U.S. foreign policy was headed down, given the people who have been in charge on both sides of the aisle, was moving towards this like resurrection of the Cold War. Like this was happening before Russia apparently hacked our elections or whatever. And the fact that Hillary lost and Trump won and Trump is like, I love Vlad or whatever. They're just, I mean, it's like they're doubling down or it's like magnified the level of anti-Russia hysteria than it otherwise would be. But I'm like super concerned. I mean, the kind of shit that we're hearing right now, where like not only did Russia apparently hack our elections, but like you've just got all these anonymous intelligence officials. I mean, every day, I look at the New York Times and the Washington Post, and there's like 5 articles being like Russia's like a demon child or something. It's really concerning, and it really reminds me of the fervor before the Iraq War. And I don't think that doesn't mean, we're going to go invade Russia, but I feel like our country wants to go to war with Russia. Like the establishment wants to go to war with Russia, and that's fucking terrifying.
Yeah, I don't. Like, it's funny because one of the things about Trump that friends of mine across the spectrum actually liked is that it appeared like on the issue of Russia and on the issue of Syria, you had a guy who was going to be more hands-off, and you can make a case that with some of the people in his campaign, he was overly chummy with Russia for business reasons and stuff, but to have an administration that's not as fervently against them and escalating with them is something that's a positive. So what the Democrats have done in their infinite stupidity is they've taken possibly one of Trump's biggest strengths and tried to argue against that, as opposed to arguing against the 8,000 other things he says and does that are stupid and that are corrupt and that are wrong and that are terrible. So from what I see right now, and obviously this is super duper early, but if the Democrats keep making these shitty arguments and keep basically attacking him in all the wrong ways and keep pivoting to the right of him to attack him, man, it looks like he's going to win again. It looks like he would win again in 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, you've got Trump, like, first of all, you've got Paul Ryan being like, they've got this whole agenda. They want to defund Planned Parenthood. They want to, like, cut Medicare and Social Security. They want to do all this stuff. And I mean, Sanders came out, which was awesome, and had that like tweet he held up and, tried to talk about Medicare and Social Security. But it's really hard to even focus on fighting any of those things when the entire like news media and the leadership of the Democratic Party is busy fear-mongering about Russia. It's like, I don't know, do they think that they can oppose and challenge Donald Trump and the far right taking over the government by, starting a war with Russia? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And yeah, like you said, you're going to lose voters, not only voters, but like, it's uninspiring and it's like the wrong shit. Like right now we need leadership like Bernie Sanders, like Keith Ellison, like trying to get people excited and, willing to come out and like fight back against a ton of really bad stuff that's going to happen in Congress. Like they're going to try and repeal Obamacare. They're going to try and do all kinds of awful domestic stuff. And instead of focusing on that, like we're busy focusing on Vladimir Putin. And I'll tell you this too, is like being abroad gave me a lot of perspective because I was watching some of this play out from afar and the US looks so stupid. Yeah. Like the US is like a clown. And it's not just because Donald Trump was elected. It's even the way Obama's acting. Like with, expelling all these Russian diplomats and, then like Russia, hitting back with like, well, we're not going to expel your diplomats. We're going to invite them to dinner. Like, it's just the U.S. looks like it's like flailing like some, fish out of water.
Yeah, that actually. I'm sorry.
It's embarrassing. Go ahead. No, it's embarrassing. And it's like for the first time in my life, after Trump was elected and then after everything kept going like really crazy here and it was international headlines, the anti-Russia hysteria and all the other stuff, I, for the first time in my life, felt so American and felt so embarrassed.
Yeah, no.
Like it was a weird feeling.
No, and I feel the same thing. I just covered a story today on the show about Congress decided in a vote of 382 to 80 decided let's condemn the UN for condemning illegal Israeli settlements. And you look at that and you go, what the fuck planet are you on? Like the vote was 14-0 for a reason. It wasn't close. It's not even a question. Like it's a given that we know that what the legally recognized borders are, and we know that they're doing illegal settlements, they're doing occupation, they're continuing to expand. Netanyahu just announced the other day he's going to do more fucking land grabs. And like, what are you saying? Like, what's your point? Is your point whatever Israel does is okay, whatever we do is okay, and fuck whatever the people who are enemies are supposed to be, whatever they do is wrong. Like, this kind of thinking, it's like they're not even trying to be logical. They're like, fuck it, we're just going to be wrong and double down on it.
You said 380?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, the vote count?
Did I fuck up the numbers? Does it not add up to the right number?
No. I'm thinking so a lot of Democrats voted.
Yeah, over 100. Over 100 Democrats.
Jesus Christ.
Yes, I know. It's crazy. And then I did this story yesterday. When you look at the history of it through the different presidencies, Reagan had 21 different condemnations of Israel. You had George H.W. Bush had 9 different condemnations of Israel. George W. Bush had, 6, I think, something like that. And Obama does 1, a totally toothless resolution that just states the obvious and says illegal settlements are illegal, and the world fucking explodes. Like, what is it about the spectrum in Washington? For whatever reason, the Overton window just shifts so far to the fucking right.
Well, because it's the conversation on, that's really sad. The conversation on Israel is still, of course, like very controlled and confined between these. Like it's like there's only so much you can say, even as a Democrat, despite the fact that like the Democratic base has changed dramatically on what they think about Israel-Palestine. And it shows you, just the fact that Keith Ellison has been attacked the way he has it just shows you the Israel lobby is still really, really strong and still has like a stranglehold over Congress, especially when like your own leader. I'm surprised by that just because Obama is like the Democratic leader by default.
Yeah.
And he's the one who decided to abstain from this UN vote. And so you still had all these Democrats, voting on Israel's side and with the Republicans and on Donald Trump's side. At this point, honestly, like Democrats who decide to continue to be so pro-Israel to the point where they're like locking arms with Netanyahu, they should be like shamed and ostracized as, Trump, as like in league with Trump.
Yeah.
Because that's what Netanyahu is. That's what Israel is. Israel's government, at least, is a representation of like the same far right mentality that Donald Trump represents. And that's why they get along so well.
Totally. And I love how bold an abstention is. Like, oh, I'm not even going to vote in favor of it. I'm just going to abstain. And they act like, it was this crazy thing. It's amazing
like
how
Obama,
far the spectrum is off.
Like Obama dropped a nuclear bomb on Israel or something.
No, that's exactly the response was like that. And then there was, I guess, Naftali Bennett, an Israeli official, was on CNN, and he was talking to Jake Tapper. And now, like, it's acceptable to just go in mainstream media, and he was like, settlements? What do you mean settlements? What are you talking about? Settlements? You're talking about settlements? What do you mean settlements? What do you mean occupation? There's an occupation? What are you talking about? It's like, what the... That's ridiculous.
That's the Israeli, like the Israeli leadership right now is so crazy. Everyone freaked out about this guy that Trump appointed to be the ambassador to Israel, David Friedman. But like David Friedman, and I think he called Jews, like liberal Jews who like criticize Israel, like he equated them with capos, like Jewish concentration guards at Auschwitz.
Yeah,
this guy is like like that's the Israeli government. The Israeli government is filled with people at seniorship levels who talk like that guy. Like Naftali Bennett, that guy who was on CNN, he like goes around and brags. He's done this several times about like, I killed lots of Arabs in my life. What's the big deal? Like he wants to, I mean, he's always wanted to annex the entire West Bank to Israel and like basically just, ethnically cleanse Palestinians completely. And then, actually, I'm sorry, I'm wrong. That's other Israeli officials. Naftali Bennett wants a permanent apartheid. Like he's very openly just they don't have rights. It's fine.
Maybe you're talking about Ayelet Shaked.
Yeah, she's a genocide enthusiast.
That's right,
she's the justice minister. I mean, there's her
justice minister for genocide. Unbelievable.
I mean, during the war on Gaza, she was calling for Palestinian mothers to be killed in their beds to prevent them from birthing little snakes.
They're all the enemy. She whatever it was, she put on Facebook like this poem or this story from this hard right Israeli warmonger, and it basically was like, kill the mothers. They're all the enemy. What is it going to take for you to realize they're all the enemy?
And these are the people that we are. That's what's really scary about the Israel situation is like we get like Obama like gave Israel this $38 billion gift in weapons for the next 10 years. And their government's crazy. Like they're going to use those. Like you've got Ayelet Shaked and Naftali Bennett and like another woman, I think is it Zippy Hotovely? It's the other one. There's so many. Miri Regev. She's like the culture minister. And she called African migrants a cancer. Like, and it incited this riot against Africans in Tel Aviv. Like, these are the people who we give weapons to. It's really concerning and scary. And it makes sense, actually, that like Democrats don't like Israel as much anymore, because who would support that except for people who are far right and genocide enthusiasts?
The thing that annoys me more than anything is they do this trick where they'll say to well-meaning liberals in the U.S. and in the West in general, like, whoa, what do you mean? You got to support us because we're for liberal values, we're for democracy, we're for freedom, and look at all these, savage countries around us who aren't for it, all these theocracies, all these, bad fundamentalist Muslims around us. So they scream about liberal values, but they use it's pinkwashing. They use it as a shield, like, oh, look, we treat gays better, therefore excuse when I do occupation and apartheid and more land grabs, and so it's a trick. It's, look, I do one thing good over here, therefore you're not allowed to criticize me on the other stuff, or I'm just going to accuse you of being with the enemy.
Yeah, and Israel isn't even that liberal. It's actually like its streets have become increasingly right-wing, and like liberal Israelis are actually like leaving Israel if they can. And a lot of them are, weirdly enough, moving to like Berlin. But in Israel, the atmosphere is much more right-wing. There's like you have every few months, you'll have these death to Arabs rallies in the streets where people literally chant like death to Arabs, death to leftists.
Yeah.
I'm sure some of them are gay people. That's great.
Yeah.
But like, it's like at the end of the day, like that doesn't really mean it's okay or justify like doing what they do to Palestinians and keeping literally millions of people captive and refusing to give them rights. That's what you have in Israel. You have one state. All right, like people keep talking about two states, and two states is dead. It's never going to happen because of all those settlements. At the end of the day, eventually it is already. It's one state from the river to the sea. It's just millions of people have no rights.
Yeah.
And so at some point, Palestinians, if they ever do, are going to be like, just give us rights. And once they do that, it's going to be like Israel, it's game over.
Yeah.
that's where it's headed. But they're going to have a really good time with the Trump administration because Trump is like okay with all that. He's okay with having people without rights. So
And during the campaign, he actually caught a lot of shit in the primary because here's my guess as to what was really going on in his head when this situation unfolded. He probably doesn't know anything about Israel-Palestine or the Middle East in general. So when they brought up, like, hey, what kind of a president are you going to be on Israel-Palestine? He was like, I'm going to be neutral. I'll be neutral. And, like, because in his mind, he's thinking, well, who the fuck could disagree with neutral on, like, anything? So he throws it out there, and then the media was like, bro, how dare you? We suck up to Israel and hate Palestinians. And then he was like, whoa, yeah, no, that's what I mean. I'm going to be the most pro-Israel president ever. I don't know what you guys are talking about. So, but he caught shit for saying I'll be neutral, and then now, I mean, it appears to me like he's just doing the old, anti-Obama thing, like, oh, the black Democrat decided to lightly condemn them, so now he's just going to go balls to the wall, far right, let Netanyahu do whatever he wants, and then claim victory the entire time.
Well, it's that, but there's also a shared ideology between people like Netanyahu and Trump. Like they are both
authoritarian.
They're both. I mean, like they both have like an authoritarian stream running through them, but they're also far right, and they have like with Donald Trump, he riles up white nationalists, and with Netanyahu, I mean, like the kind of Zionism that he espouses is the equivalent of white nationalism. It's just like Jewish nationalism.
Right.
And that's what he riles up. Like when he was running for re-election, Netanyahu, one of the reasons he won is because he got his base to come out by warning and fear-mongering about Arabs coming out to like vote in droves.
Yep, I remember.
So they have a lot in common. And also like they both hate Obama. Netanyahu has been really like he's like extremely racist man. And he's basically like hated Obama from the beginning, and him and a lot of people in his administration openly call Obama a Muslim, like all the time. Like it happens all the time. They call him a Muslim who hates Jews. Like it's insane. They the way that they refer to like Obama, they've been extreme. So Obama hates the Israelis, like the Israeli leadership, even though he gives them weapons, and that just shows you the level of pressure that the Israel lobby has in this country, that they can pressure a president who has been treated like shit by the Israelis repeatedly. Like Netanyahu came to this country invited by the opposition to like lobby Congress against the sitting president's Iran deal.
Yeah. And he should be thanking Obama for that. He should be thanking him because the Iran deal cut off their path to a nuke, and all that the U.S. did in response was give Iran back their own money, which we stole.
Well, it's even funny because Iran was never trying to make a nuke. At the end of the day, they weren't. That was like Israel's, first of all, way to distract from the Palestine issue, but then people like Netanyahu, with him, it's him and like he's like a neocon. He's a card-carrying neocon. Like it has the same ideology as like people like Dick Cheney and
he
others.
wanted to attack Iran. There were reports coming out of his administration and for whatever reason, I don't know who held him back at the last minute, but he wanted to do it. He still wants to do it. And now with Trump picking not just Rex Tillerson, the ExxonMobil CEO for Secretary of State, but he's got neocon John Bolton as number 2, which is nuts because John Bolton makes fucking Dick Cheney look like Noam Chomsky.
John Bolton's like a neocon on coke. Like
it's like he's made a religion out of just starting wars. Like the whole thing is American exceptionalism. And that's another thing. I just recently pieced this together. I never did before, but the whole idea of American exceptionalism, like obviously I always thought like, okay, it's stupid. But if you really think about it, it's actually bigoted because what's another term for exceptional? Supreme. So it's American supremacist. You're an American supremacist, and that means... And the crazy thing is they make two claims at the same time. They say, oh, we got to control the world because, we're the world police and we care about human rights and we just want to treat everybody equal. So wait, so is it that you want to treat everybody equal or that you believe you're supreme and you're exceptional and that America's better than everybody else? So it's like a fundamentalist religion, and guys like John Bolton, the high priest of it, I mean, this is like, all he wants to do is start more wars. The guy's never met a war he didn't like.
Yeah, I don't know what's more dangerous. It's like that the line of thinking that you just explained is full of contradictions. You've got people like John Bolton who ascribe to that, and then you've got people like Henry Kissinger who did so much damage around the world. But I wouldn't call him an American nationalist or supremacist. He's just like a ruthless, what they call like a ruthless realist, to the point where, and extremely anti-communist, but like, and just wants to maintain this like delicate balance of hegemony.
Right.
So if that means killing, like he's open if that means like a few million people have to die
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I wonder, I don't even know. I don't know what's more dangerous, but yeah, John Bolton, I mean, that's one thing that I'm really concerned about. Like when it comes to foreign policy with Donald Trump, I don't think he's going to be running any of his own policies. I think it's going to be the people around him who are, and the people he's appointed are crazy across the board.
Yeah.
The only thing he might be better at than Hillary Clinton would have been is like with Syria. I think they're going to back off, which is going to be a good thing for Syria.
Yeah.
But that said, I'm really worried about, like, I feel like they're going to try and go to war with Iran, if not Russia. Like the people, but that's the people around Trump. I mean, who knows like how much influence Trump will actually have over his own administration? I don't know. But I don't even know. It's really unpredictable. That's what sucks about Trump. He's really unpredictable. You don't know which way he's going to go on anything.
Yeah, because there's really no core philosophy. It's more, I agree with you that I thought there were two possibilities when he got elected. Either he's going to get into office and go, all right, who the fuck am I kidding? I'm in way over my head right now. Like, I'm just this reality show guy who's got a big ego who just kind of coasted to the White House on my narcissism and my arrogance. So that's possible that he gets in there and he's like, I'm in over my head, so I'm just going to defer to everybody around me, and I'm just going to pick people who've been here before, the establishment. So either he'd be the most establishment president ever, or he has that authoritarian wild card angle about him where it's like, you know, if he gets angered by something and he goes on a tweet storm at fucking 3 o'clock in the morning like an unhinged cokehead or some shit.
Yeah.
Like, and that guy with the NSA is scary. Like, that guy with that. So I thought it would be one of the two. Either he'd go bullheaded authoritarian, not listen to anybody and go off every impulse, or he just defers to the establishment. But what it looks like to me now is that it's like a mix of both, which is not better.
It's not.
It's still bad that, you know, it sucks that there is no coherent philosophy. And what's amazing is, to get back to the Hillary thing, is like, the guy was so fucking beatable. If I was running Hillary's campaign, she would have won.
Dude, my pinky finger should have been able to beat Donald Trump. Like, I'm actually, like, my response when I realized, like, oh my God, this guy won. Like, my immediate response was just anger.
Yeah.
I was angry at the Democratic Party. Like, I'm just like, how did you fuck this up?
Yeah.
Like, how did you lose Michigan? Like, what? Like, I was livid at the Democratic Party. I mean, they really, and what really pisses me off is their whole theme was like, we got to protect, you know, people of color. They kept calling people of color their firewall. You know, this is our firewall, Latinos and blacks and like Muslims and whoever else Trump wants to like stomp on. This is our firewall. And like, at the end of the day, dude, you guys totally screwed over your firewall. Like, and you did it by like not paying attention to like what you had to. Like, they knew our electoral system sucks, and it is the way it is. Like, everybody after she lost was like, well, the electoral system's undemocratic. Yes, it's totally undemocratic, but like, you knew what you had to win.
Right. You knew the stakes.
How you had to play this game.
Yeah.
And then, God, when that Politico article came out saying how they just ignored their own people, being like, you got to come to Ohio. Yeah. You got to come to Michigan. And they were like, nope, we're in Brooklyn. We're good.
And what did she do?
It makes me even angrier.
She did like a rally with LeBron James thinking, this'll do it. Like, it was all... she was a house of cards. Everything about her was a house of cards. And you could see it. Anybody who's really paying attention and is a political junkie could see it, because her attacks against Trump, too, were like the worst kinds of attacks. Like, when he would say, make America great again, her response was, America's already great. Like, what are you, Ronald Reagan? Like, is that the fucking... Like, who says that? You're supposed to be... The Democrats are supposed to portray themselves as the anti-establishment candidate who are going to go in and change shit and make it better. And she came in there and said, no, I'm the status quo candidate. And then whenever she got mad at Trump, like, Trump said at one point that we should, quote, take out their families, talking about terrorists in the Middle East. So not just the terrorists, their families. He just advocated doing terrorism on live TV. How many times did Hillary Clinton bring that up? Zero. She was too busy saying, oh my God, this guy, he curses. He was mean to Miss America. He was mean to her. How dare he be so mean to her? Do you understand that people in the country look at that, they start rolling their eyes. They're like, enough with like the PC outrage. There was genuine outrage there to be angry at Trump for. He said, he went around the country saying, let's torture. Like,
Mexicans are rapists.
Yeah, Mexicans are rapists.
Yeah.
Let's ban 1.6 billion people from coming into the country. And she couldn't beat him. That's so sad.
Well, her response, actually, it wasn't just the PC stuff. It was also to, like you mentioned earlier, that everyone, the Democrats still go, like, they attack Trump on like the very few things that he's like decent on. That's what she did. Like the couple things that he was decent on, where he was like, he was at least in rhetoric saying he doesn't want to go destabilizing countries anymore. And
Right.
Hillary Clinton like does these, like she did at least 2 or 3 of these where she did these like national security speeches being like, Trump wants America
Yep.
to not be in charge of the world anymore. And it's like, dude, like who are you trying to like get to vote for you? Like Americans don't
Yeah.
give a shit. If anything, they don't want to be running around the world. Like that's a losing case to make.
Totally.
People like what Trump is saying about that.
Totally.
Like, and then also with like the free trade stuff, like, you know, Trump, those are like the 2 things that Trump hammered and stayed consistent on. And the free trade thing, that's what he was getting people to vote for him on.
Yeah.
And her response to that was like, we can't be protectionists. Like these trade deals weren't terrible. You're rewriting history. It's like, no, dude, like you're totally going to lose this. Like it's utterly mind blowing to me. And I think that speaks to just how like the liberal democratic establishment is so disconnected from what Americans want, or they just don't care. They don't care what their base or what Americans need and want. They just like want to win these moralistic posturing games. And they want to like avoid addressing anything real that like gets in the way of their, you know, donors.
Yeah, exactly. Because
Yeah.
they're a Wall Street party now. That's what it is. So if the Republicans are 100% sold out and corrupt, the Democrats are 80% sold out and corrupt, and they're so lost that even when you have somebody like Keith Ellison, who barely hangs on to support from the Bernie wing because he supported intervention in Libya, and he tweeted recently about like, oh, if you think Hillary's corrupt, you're rewarding 25 years of Republican fear-mongering or whatever. So like he barely hangs on to support from the Bernie wing, but to the establishment Democrats, they're like, oh, this guy's too far left. So if they go down this path and if they keep control, that's it. Like nobody's gonna suck it up and vote for your shitty candidates anymore. There was this story yesterday that came out, a few days ago, about how the DNC picked for the war room to oppose Trump Hillary's former staffers. The one group of people in the country who have proven they couldn't beat that orange-haired buffoon are now the ones who are in charge of fighting him.
So let's give him another chance. Let's give him another few million bucks to like screw up again. I mean, it's like, it makes me mad, but then it's also like, oh my God, like we are so screwed because like the only organized opposition that exists to Trump, or like potentially exists, is the Democratic Party. We don't have anything else that has power.
At risk of giving away too much here, we're working on something to come to the rescue.
We need something to come to the
Yes.
rescue, like very, very badly, or else things are just like looking bad for a while.
I totally agree. So, but now let's talk a little bit about Syria, because we somehow managed to go for 30 minutes or more talking about other things. By the way, the whole original point of this for everybody listening was Syria. So, now we're finally going to get to that.
Syria? What is Aleppo?
So you, very ballsy of you to go to Syria. Why don't you tell me a little bit about what it was like? I'm also interested in like how you dotted the I's and crossed the T's and stuff. Like how did it, like if I was thinking now, I'm going to go to Syria, I would be like, okay, what do I do? You apparently pieced it all together. So explain to everybody what that was like and what happened when you were there, and give us a little insight into that.
Well, so I went to Syria actually on like a delegation for a conference that was being held there. The conference was organized by this British like NGO that's very pro-government. They're pretty explicitly pro-government. And they wanted to organize a conference that Western journalists could go to for like 2 days in Syria, in Damascus, and hear basically like the government side of what's happening there on the ground. And then after that, you can like stay in the country for a little bit and do on the ground reporting. And so Syria hadn't been allowing like Western journalists to come in. It wasn't easy for Western journalists to go in. And so actually there was journalists on this trip from every single major media outlet you can imagine. Like the New York Times was there, the Washington Post, like NPR, every outlet in the UK, like the BBC, the Sunday Times.
So they're all genocide apologists, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
They all love genocide. Just so everybody note that for the record.
Yeah, I love Assad. And so so reporters from all of these outlets are there. There's also some British parliamentarians and a couple of their staffers. And so that's how I went. That's the NGO, the British like group that did this. they organized all the visas and stuff like that. So like this, everybody paid their own way. It wasn't like the government paid for it, and it wasn't even necessarily government sponsored. And it was also the only thing the government did was they approved visas and they provided security where you need security, because there's parts of Syria where you need security.
Right.
And so that's how I went there, and I got attacked like pretty hard and smeared for going to this conference that literally every single like major media outlet had a reporter at. I was the only one that got attacked like this, and I was like all these like it was like Rania went to go to a conference till she was paid by Assad. It was crazy. And so that was nutty. Like I was in a war zone and I was being attacked as like a fascist. And I was like, I don't know what I did.
Yeah.
But that happened. That's how I got in. And actually I didn't end up going to the conference because I got like smeared over it. So the Syrian government was like really busy dealing with all these other journalists that they like kind of forgot about me. So I had a few days where I just kind of did my own thing, because it's a little bit hard to do journalism in Syria because it is a police state. But I had a few days where I could go around and talk to people with like people, a network of people that I know there. Without having like a government minder, which was really cool. And I got more unfiltered access to like people in Syria. And I gotta say, like one thing I was really struck by in Damascus was it's really secure, Damascus is, and it was really hard to recognize there was even a war happening because it's so secure. But literally like, you know, a few kilometers this way or that, like there's some armed group that's fighting with soldiers.
Right.
And so you hear shooting sometimes, but otherwise, it's relatively secure, and so it's a little bit hard to see that it's at war. But then once you start talking to people, like everyone there has lost loved ones, has lost friends and family, and has like horror stories about what's taken place in that country. And also another thing that was surprising to me, I mean, I knew there was support for the government. There has to be some, or else they wouldn't still exist. But there was a lot of support for the government, even from people who don't necessarily like the government. And I went to Aleppo as well, and that was a similar thing I found. And this was before the recent operation to take the eastern side back, the government's operation. But that's one thing that was really fascinating to me is like, and it made sense, is that a vast majority of Syrians, like something like 75%, live in government areas in Syria. That's a lot of people. It's like 17 million people. And a lot of the people I spoke to were pretty critical of the government, like not openly in public because, again, it's still a police state, but they had criticism of the government. They were pretty sharply critical. But despite that, even people who literally like sounded like they loathed the government, their opinions were basically this, is like the alternative is unacceptable and worse. And so we want the government to win. And for them, I mean, what people in this country don't know is that the alternative is almost entirely made up of Al-Qaeda linked jihadist groups.
Right.
Now, I mean, we call them rebels in this country, which is really shocking because we spent the past, 15 years fighting an endless war across the world based on the idea that we have to fight Al-Qaeda. Wherever they exist, it justifies bombing, right? Yet somehow our policy in Syria is like the inversion of that, where we were literally knowingly, we know this, like mainstream outlets have reported on this, we were knowingly funding Al-Qaeda linked extremists to weaken the Syrian government, which is insane to me. And I take a particular outraged outlook on this, and maybe it's because I have personal connections to the region. Like my family is from the region. I have family in both Syria and Lebanon, and we're like minorities there. And so when you're funding Al-Qaeda linked extremists and empowering those groups, like they kill people like me. Yeah. They kill people like my relatives for their identity. Yeah. Like they do awful things to women. They impose this like extremist religious law on people. And so these are like things that you don't talk about here, that the mainstream media doesn't really cover here. They're just rebels and we're supposed to support them. And so just being there and hearing the stories of people who've lived under them, and people also like who protested in 2011 and now want the government to win because these groups are so horrendous. That was really like important, I felt like, to bring back here. And since I have been back here, I've written a few articles about this. And I mean, I've just never on any issue, and I'm someone who's covered Israel-Palestine, which is a difficult issue to cover. You get attacked by all kinds of groups that are pro-Israel, and you can lose your career over that. But I've never experienced the level of pushback and hatred that came with trying to report honestly on what I saw and experienced in Syria.
Yeah. So that actually gets me to my whole thing, like my evolution on this issue. So when I was obviously doing my show and covering news at the time, and so when the conflict first erupted in Syria, I kind of went with the same line that everybody in the U.S. was going with, which is, okay, Assad, brutal dictator, killing his own people, is a popular revolution, and they're just fighting for freedom and democracy, and they're fighting for human rights, and who the hell could be against that? What kind of a monster are you if you're against that? And what I noticed is, and this is weird because I guess it's this wisdom of the crowds kind of thing, but like every time I would talk about Syria, and I would talk about it, from that perspective, I would notice that the segments would get massive dislikes. And I'm like, well, why is it? I don't understand. And so fast forward like a month or 2 months, and I finally started coming across articles that really started shedding light on what was happening there. And some of them made clear pretty early on that the most organized, aggressive, persistent rebel factions were Al-Qaeda linked. And I mean, obviously that's a problem. So
just a little.
When I started talking about it from that perspective, then all of a sudden the likes started going up, and I'm like, well, I guess I just had missed that angle earlier. And so to be fair to the media, I feel like print outlets for a pretty long time have been pretty good on the issue, but in terms of CNN, MSNBC, the nightly news, like all mainstream media as in TV, they've fallen hook, line, and sinker for the narrative of Assad bad. And then you look at the geopolitical situation, and then you really start to see, oh, okay, I see like why they're doing the propaganda and why they're so invested in the rebel narrative. And it has a lot to do with the fact that Assad is aligned with Russia, and Assad is aligned with Iran. Iran's our enemy. Russia now, obviously, they're our enemy, and they're heating up even more so to be our enemy. And, of course, we're the U.S. We like to dominate the world, and we have business interests and geopolitical interests, and for strategic reasons, we want to have control of that region. So, basically, the bottom line is I came to realize that, the U.S. is, like, totally cool with Syria becoming a Saudi Arabia-style theocracy. As long as we have our own puppet government in there that's aligned with us for business interests, then it's fine. And then you read even more about the Syrian government and you go, oh, they're a secular socialist government. They have a socialist constitution. And you look at the makeup of the Syrian army and you go, oh, it's 80% Sunni, and then you got Shias, you got Christians, and you look at the rebels and you go, oh my God, they're all like fundamentalist Muslims and jihadis, and they're trying to implement like a theocracy. And you go, finally it clicked, and my buddy also helped me along with this too because he knew about the conflict way more than I did. And you finally realize like, oh, this is basically like if there was a Tea Party uprising in the U.S. And now you have like well-meaning Western liberals supporting the equivalent of an armed Tea Party uprising in Syria.
Yes, yeah, exactly. That's actually like one of the that's one of the comparisons that I use to try and explain it to people. And I mean, I had an evolution on this too. Like exactly what you explained. Like I started out seeing it as like, look, I was excited about what happened in Egypt. They like toppled this dictator. And then once there was like, but then Libya happened. And so Libya, I think, made a lot of people suspicious a little bit, or like maybe more skeptical of what the Western media was saying about a place like Syria. But that said, it's like I did buy the line of like, what's happening in Syria is this popular, peaceful, democratic uprising against a brutal dictator, and they had to take up arms. They had no choice, and we have to help them now. I never, ever supported like overthrowing the government because I don't think that the U.S. should be doing that. But that said, I kind of stayed away from the issue. And then when I did comment on it, I made sure that I like said what I was supposed to, which is the government's evil, and the rebels are fighting for freedom or something. And what really changed my mind about it was also people pushed back against me, but then also my own family was being affected by it.
Right.
And that for me was like a really eye-opening thing. It's like when your own what are my relatives supposed to do? Embrace Nusra, like embrace Al-Qaeda in Syria. Like they, it's absurd. And then on top of that, it's just, my thing is, it's like when I look at Syria, you start to see some parallels to what the U.S. did in Afghanistan.
Right, exactly
right. This is not
right.
the first time that the U.S. has used Islamic extremists. Mujahideen, exactly. The U.S. in Afghanistan knowingly armed people that were known for throwing acid in women's faces.
Yeah.
Like Afghanistan wasn't some Taliban-style place. It wasn't some Saudi-style country. It wasn't like extremist at all. It was moving more liberally. Women dressed like, women here in some areas of Afghanistan. And the US, not only did the US arm a bunch of crazy people to try and weaken the Soviet Union and was occupying Afghanistan, the US also, USAID in particular, sent violent jihadist textbooks to the refugee camps in Pakistan full of Afghan children.
That's right.
To try and teach them to be anti-communist, anti-Soviet through the use of teaching them about jihad. And then 10 years later, you have the rise of the Taliban. Those people, where did they come from? It's like the U.S. remade Afghan society into something that it wasn't until now. All these years later, you still have a Taliban insurgency in Afghanistan and all these warlords. And the U.S. did that. And then it blew back so bad with 9/11. And that's another thing I do. I don't know if there's time to talk about this, but I think that this is something that progressives in particular, people on the left in particular, need to reckon with and have an analysis about, is about the fact that the kind of jihadist extremism that we see in parts of Europe when you see attacks, or here in this country every once in a while, for a long time we used to explain 9/11 on the left as something that happened as a result of legitimate grievances against U.S. foreign policy. And there totally are several legitimate grievances against U.S. foreign policy, and I'm sure a lot of these people do espouse some of them. That said, the U.S. does a lot of messed up things around the world, to various areas of the world. But in the Middle East and South, in parts in Afghanistan in particular, the U.S. empowered, funded, trained, and armed people who have this violent jihadist, Wahhabi-style ideology.
Yeah.
And that is what's blowing back against us. It's not these, it's like with 9/11, you had a bunch of people who weren't a bunch of poor people who were necessarily bombed by the U.S. They were Al-Qaeda that the U.S. helped foment in Afghanistan. And the same thing that we're doing in Syria right now is, right now in Syria, we've, I believe they say, U.S. intelligence says that Al-Qaeda's largest affiliate in history now exists in Syria, ever. We did that. We did that by knowingly arming Al-Qaeda extremists. And so now you've got all of these violent jihadists that have an ideology that they're following, and they're not going to let go of that just because they lose in Syria, and they are losing in Syria. And that's why you see attacks in parts of Europe. And you're going to start to see more of that happening in Turkey and Europe.
Yes.
And it's eventually going to blow back against the U.S. And when it does, we cannot respond by just saying, no, they have legitimate grievances. We have to recognize and understand that this is something that the U.S. has incubated and empowered, knowing that it would likely come back against us at some point.
Yeah.
And the last thing I want to add to that is that in the era of right-wing, this resurgence in far-right nationalism, whether it's Donald Trump here or Marine Le Pen in France, these kinds of attacks fuel that right-wing resurgence. Donald Trump looks at that and he says, Muslims are all bad, we have to ban them.
Right.
And, white nationalists get riled up. And so that's why it's even more crucial than ever that we have a better analysis on the progressive left and response than just stop saying mean things, than just saying that they're all racist, shut up. There is something that's happening that we have helped empower, and it's violent jihadism, and it's a tool of imperialist powers, not some these aren't victims of imperialism. These are our friends when we want them to be, whether it's in Syria or Afghanistan. And we have to start seeing it that way.
Yeah, and I actually think it's a little worse than even you laid out there, because we're still buddy-buddy with Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia is the home of this Wahhabism, which is the problem. It's the most ultra-conservative, extremist form of Islam, and that is the form that we've empowered. I mean, we keep giving them billions and billions of dollars in weapons. We turn a blind eye as they declare all atheists are terrorists, and women need to cover up, and women aren't allowed to drive, and they behead people in the public square for drug smuggling and
sorcery. Don't forget
sorcery and witchcraft. And as long as you're our ally, okay, well, you got to do whatever you want because we have a business deal with you, business partnership. But, I mean, look at, for example, what Saudi Arabia is doing in Yemen with our backing, where we refuel their jets, we give them coordinates on the map, and they're brazenly massacring civilians. I mean, they've attacked open-air markets, they've attacked hospitals, they've attacked schools, and thousands of people are dying. And also, you see made in the USA on all the munitions after they explode. And we're using cluster bombs, which are illegal under international law. And there was even a story in Reuters about a year ago which described how a lot of the funding and arms that were given to Saudi gets right into the hands of Al-Qaeda because it goes to Saudi, and Saudi says, well, fuck it. We need Sunni militias on the ground to fight the Shia Houthis in Yemen. So who are the most aggressive Sunni militias? Exactly, Al-Qaeda. So we back them, and hey, it's fine. And again, this is exactly like you said, the 1980s all over again, arming the Mujahideen. It's happening in Yemen. It's happening in Syria, as you laid out. And yeah, this is, of course it's going to, and even when you defeat them on the battlefield, yeah, they're going to turn to domestic terror. Duh. Like, okay, so you took away territory from ISIS. Great. Everybody's happy about that. But then you get attacks in France, you get attacks in Germany, you get attacks in Iraq, you get attacks in Turkey, and it never ends.
Because the ideology is still being spread. That's one of the things. It's like you mentioned Saudi Arabia. I mean, Saudi Arabia, we know, spends like hundreds of millions of dollars building Wahhabi mosques. Like,
that's right.
It's like all of these. And you do have to be careful when you do talk about this. And I think this is why a lot of progressives and liberals don't want to, because you start to get into this territory where you don't want to sound like an Islamophobe.
Right.
But I find that offensive too, because when you say that it's Islamophobic to go after Wahhabism, you are equating, or to like criticize Al-Qaeda groups, you are equating Al-Qaeda and ISIS and like Saudi Arabia with Islam.
Yeah.
And that's just not the case.
It's like saying it's anti-Christian to go after the KKK, or anti-Christian to go after Jerry Falwell or Pat Robertson or something. It's like, well, no, we're against their fundamentalist version of it, and they're the problem with that ideology attached to it, the most extreme version of it.
Exactly. And also, like, what people don't care about, because they don't understand, it's such a complex situation, but in the Middle East, it's not, first of all, not everyone's Muslim. Second of all, not everyone's Sunni Muslim, and Wahhabism is specifically like a sect of Sunni Islam, right?
Yep.
So the people who are generally the targets are, Sunnis who are secular, right? Or like who don't follow their rules, right. But mostly like they have a very genocidal ideology towards Shia. That's why, I mean, when you see in Baghdad,
in Iraq this weekend, that's right, 5 bombings targeting Shias, and ISIS does press releases where they say, yeah, we're targeting Shias. That's the point.
Yeah, exactly. Or like in Syria. The interesting thing about Syria is everybody wants to say, like, there's a Sunni victimhood ideology that's taken, or like mentality that's taken over in the Middle East. I think a lot of it's because of Al Jazeera
right.
Arabic.
The majority is so victimized. It's like when the Christians here say, war on Christmas, there's a war on Christians. It's like, what the fuck are you talking about? You're the majority, you dipshits.
Well, there are a lot of parallels to be made here. I mean, in the Middle East, the majority is Sunni. And so that would be like your majority whites here, right?
Right. Yeah.
Not all of them are like, Wahhabis. But there is a Sunni like victimhood mentality that since the Iraq War has its roots in the Iraq War, because you had like the Sunni minority taken out of power.
Right, yeah.
And then also there was like a sectarian violence between Sunnis and Shia.
Of course. Yeah.
Sunni
and
bodies
Maliki
were like
wasn't the best
dead.
leader, the Shia leader who took over after. Right. He repressed Sunnis legitimately, so
there's with that, but the thing is, you've got like outlets like Al Jazeera Arabic is one of the biggest outlets. I think it's one of the most watched in the region. And nobody here knows this because they don't like watch it or probably understand Arabic, but it is like incitement 24/7 against, like, it is like the voice of like Wahhabist, like nationalism. It's crazy and insane. And media outlets like Al Jazeera Arabic have helped fuel this victimhood mentality. So you've got this idea like in the Middle East that is really like, it's taken over where people, especially in Lebanon, the sectarianism, I've never seen it so bad where like, Sunni areas really do believe that they're being like brutally oppressed by the Shia. And it just like, they blame everything, not all of them, but there's certain areas like neighborhoods will blame everything on Hezbollah. And I'm like, Hezbollah's not even here. like it's really confusing, but that's what's happened. It's as if like Fox News here radicalized like, a bunch of maybe poor working class whites. That's what you see happening in the Middle East with like poor working class Sunni Muslims, is this radicalization happening because Saudi Arabia is building these mosques, right? And because you've got Al Jazeera Arabic that's like 24/7 funneling hate. And so that's like something that nobody will talk about because they don't want to sound like they're being bigots.
Right.
But we have to contend with that because that has unleashed so much violence, sectarian violence in the region. And in Syria, it's really interesting because the majority of Syrians are Sunni. Right. The majority of people in the army are Sunni. Sunnis are in the government. They're in leadership positions. The head of the security services, which is probably one of the most brutal aspects of the Assad government, is a Sunni. So this is actually like in Syria, you hear people talking about their Shia death squads killing Sunnis. It's actually a war like Sunni versus Sunni in Syria, more than anything else. And the thing about Syria is it is like there are a lot more it is a pretty secular society in general. People are, even if they're religious, like they don't want religion infused in government.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so there is this like I would go in parts of Damascus and Aleppo and I'd talk to people and I'd be like, hey, like in the US there's this constant theme in the media that there's a genocide here happening against Sunnis. Like, what do you think of that? And I'd get laughed at.
Right.
Because they're like, we're all Sunni.
Right. Yeah.
Like, and we support the government. So it's like you've got Sunnis like also killing Sunnis in a way because of Wahhabism. So it's like not just the minorities. But yeah, it's as if like well-meaning Western liberals would never ever support like Trump voters and like pissed off working class and rural whites like from upstate New York invading Brooklyn and then killing a bunch of minorities.
Right.
And that is like what happened in Syria.
Yeah.
In parts of Syria.
Yeah, and there was I covered a story a few months ago. I think it was Al Jazeera Arabic, where there was a host who just casually had a conversation about whether or not they should wipe out the Alawites. Just like, so I'm going to take the position that, yeah, we should wipe them out because they're so brutal. And there's always that irony of it, too. Like, this happens all the time throughout history. It's always like, the argument's always like, we're so victimized, okay, we got to kill them all. Like, well, wait, so who's victimizing who here? And it happens all the time. I mean, even if you go back to fucking Nazi Germany, they said all the time that, we got screwed over in the Versailles Treaty. And the Versailles Treaty is the problem. We can never pay back this debt. So us good Germanic Aryan folk are, we're the victims. Okay, we got to kill. Oh, who's in control? The Jew bankers. Okay, kill all the Jews. So, and it's like, we're victims. So we got to kill you because we're good people. Wait, that logic breaks down. It drives me crazy.
What's happening? It's happened. That's like a lot of the you have that happening with like white people here in certain segments of the U.S. Not all white people, obviously, but in certain segments of the U.S., particularly Trump support base, there was a victimhood mentality about like where everybody's hurting us.
Yeah.
And there's so many parallels you can make. And I think maybe this is something that's happening around the world in general. Maybe there's a trend. Maybe it's like a part of a trend that's taking place, and there is like a basis. There is like an economic basis for this, but there's also an ideology.
Yes,
here it's
both.
Like white nationalism.
That's right. The answer is both.
Nationalism. Right. Exactly. It's not one or the other. And the problem in the Middle East is like it's actually interesting because it's if you think about it, it's like the violent jihadists there, whether it's ISIS or Al Qaeda or whatever group, in the Middle East, like they'll attack like a Western target, and then it'll fuel the white right wing resurgency here. That then wants to attack over there.
Yep, exactly.
And, like, it's this like but it's like everybody just keeps killing each other.
It's an endless cycle, yeah. Because the violence always further radicalizes the right wing on the other side and puts the right wing on the other side in power. And then you have two far right wing factions just going at it, and everybody else is like, "Can we all get along?"
Exactly. Like everybody else is like stuck being killed as a process. But it's like, I mean, I really am concerned that if we don't have more of a like concise, articulate analysis from progressives on this, you cede the ground to the right.
Yeah,
because
that's true.
They're the ones who are going to have they're the ones who automatically have an explanation about Muslims are evil whenever there's an attack anywhere.
Yeah.
And it worked after 9/11. And even now that the Syrian government is winning back so much territory, clearly the rebels aren't going to win, right?
Right.
The same people who were whitewashing, all the think tankers that were whitewashing and justifying the rebels are now starting to hold panels at their establishment think tanks in D.C. There's one next week about how we fight al-Qaeda in Syria. I'm not joking. It's like it's just a constant circle. It's great. This is great for weapons companies,
Yeah.
It's like a cycle.
Yeah.
It's like so messed up. So now we're going to get to go maybe bomb Syria to fight al-Qaeda. And after we empowered them there. It's a great business, I suppose, business model.
Yeah, the defense contractors are quite lucrative. I mean, over 50% of the discretionary budget goes to the military. And
exactly.
Yeah, and we can't get clean water in Flint, Michigan. So there's a whole realignment of priorities that needs to happen.
Well, meanwhile, the rebels that we helped fund have cut off the water to Damascus and poisoned it as well. So, like, it's just Syria. And that's the thing, is you mentioned earlier, like, you think the written journalism maybe has been better. I think there's been a lot of good journalism on Syria, but it's been occasional. For the most part, most people that are reporting on Syria, and I've met a lot of them, they live either in Beirut or Istanbul because they can't be based in Syria. Because you can't go to rebel areas, because if you do, as a Westerner or a journalist, or in anything that's not like a right-wing violent, jihadist, you will be, kidnapped, ransomed, or killed, or all of those things.
Right. Yeah.
So they report from Beirut, and all of the information they're getting is propaganda. And so if you read on Syria on a regular basis, it's almost entirely whatever narrative, like whatever PR firms that have been hired to do this or that to like whitewash the rebels, or they're putting out constant propaganda to make the rebels sound good. Even now, as the rebels are losing. And so that's what dominates in the written journalism as well.
Yeah.
It's one of the worst, most poorly covered conflicts I've ever seen, mostly because like what we did in Syria, what the U.S. did in Syria, spending $1 billion a year to like funnel arms and training to these extremist groups, we basically like went to war against Syria and nobody knows because
and outsourced it to jihadists.
Yeah, we outsourced it to Al Qaeda, and no Americans don't even know because the media keeps saying Obama's inaction is why this is happening. And like think about that for a second. When we went to war against Iraq and we had our own soldiers invade Iraq, right? There was protests. Liberals eventually at least were outraged, even the ones that supported it in the beginning. And there was a backlash to that war. There's been no backlash to Syria. If anything, there's been cheerleading across the board for the rebel side.
Yeah, it's bizarre to see liberals forget the lesson of Iraq so quickly. I've spoken about this before, and what's funny is like the responses to this argument are hysterical because I've said, well, look, I mean, all liberals across the board now look at what happened in Iraq, and everybody agrees. We're not saying Saddam was good. We're saying we shouldn't have gotten involved and waged an offensive war against a country that didn't attack us and then occupy the country and then be responsible for hundreds of thousands of civilian deaths. That's the argument. The argument isn't, necessarily, Saddam is great because we're saying we shouldn't go in. Now, you say that and everybody goes, yeah, of course that makes sense. You talk about Libya and you say, well, look, I just don't think we should have intervened. And everybody goes, yeah, of course that makes sense. You talk about Syria and you say, I don't think we should intervene. I think we should stay out. Everybody's like, oh my God, you genocide lover, apologist for, murder. It's like, what the fuck are you talking about? And furthermore, yeah, if you look at the ideology of Saddam and what Saddam did, it was a lot more brutal than what Assad is doing.
Oh my God, Saddam makes Assad look like a dog.
Exactly. And
if that's possible, yeah.
So the fact that, well-meaning liberals don't realize that in the U.S., it's amazing how effective the propaganda has been.
Well, it's so amazing too because the majority of Syrians, like the U.S. would identify way more by far, especially liberals with Syrians living in government areas. Like the Syrian society is pretty liberal. I mean, aside from political speech, and that's why it is a police state. I'm not trying to whitewash over that. People get disappeared for being dissenters. That said, aside from the politics, Syria is a pretty liberal society where and that's one of the reasons the rebels couldn't win is because people don't want to live under the Taliban.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like Syrians, you go to Damascus and there's pubs everywhere. And, it was actually really fascinating to me because I was there with other Western journalists, and I'm not going to name any names because they're not necessarily evil, bad people. But this I found really striking is one person in particular, we're eating dinner, and we're in Damascus, and, there's lots of pubs around, and it's I think it was a Friday or Saturday evening. And this person is like, you know what? I miss Damascus so much. I don't even want to work. I just want to go to all my favorite pubs. And this is a person who is very pro-opposition and wants them to win. And I'm just like, dude, if a Harar al-Shem, who you make sound like these lovely people, were to take over Damascus, there would be no pubs for you to go to.
That's
are
right.
you kidding me?
Yeah.
It's this disconnect that makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
When it comes to liberals on this issue.
Yeah.
I just don't get it.
I never understood, so what, if you're a liberal, the position you're supposed to have, generally speaking, on foreign policy is non-intervention. So the idea is, look, I'm not going to go and start wars and be violent unless there's a direct threat of violence and action against me. I fight for defensive reasons. That's the standard position. But it's amazing how easy it is to get well-meaning Western liberals to abandon that. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying if there's an actual clear genocide going on somewhere that's not a civil war, that, okay, we shouldn't get involved. No, of course, that's what you have the UN for. The UN should get involved in a situation like what we saw in Rwanda, back when the Rwanda thing was happening. They should probably, I don't know, South Sudan now is in a situation that's
that
pretty,
we created, by the way. We helped create South Sudan. I'm just gonna throw
of
that out
course,
there.
usually you dig deep enough, we're there somewhere doing some fucked up shit. But like, so, but it's amazing how easy it is to get liberals off of that position of, oh, look, I only want to do a war if we're about to be attacked and it's necessary and it's defensive. But now, like with Syria, you see all the time, you have these liberals screaming for intervention, and then I guarantee you, so let's say the U.S. did a full-scale, Iraq-style ground invasion and tried to topple the government and shit. First of all, like we already established, who would fill the vacuum most likely? It would be a Saudi-style state. I don't know which jihadist faction would fill it, but some jihadist faction would fill it. It'd be a Saudi-style state.
It would have been the Muslim Brotherhood.
And then what happens is those well-meaning liberals would turn around and 2 years later and go, "I can't believe we intervened. Why did we?"
Yeah, exactly.
Because this is terrible. Why would we do that? I don't understand. We created this problem. Why did we do this? And it's
then they would
be
they
fucking
talk about
consistent.
how backwards. Well, that would be like, all those poor people over there, they're so backwards. They like stone their women, and it's like, dude, you put those people in charge,
Right? Yeah.
Like, there was a similar dynamic during Afghanistan. I've been reading a lot of like old reporting from Afghanistan, and there was a similar dynamic where a lot of the humanitarian groups, a lot of liberals had this they romanticized the Mujahideen and they glorified them as freedom fighters, and they supported them like against the evil Soviets, right? At least with Afghanistan, there wasn't YouTube. So I can like give you that. Like, you didn't know. Maybe you didn't know that like these people were acid throwing maniacs.
Right.
With Syria, these people, like these groups, these armed groups, like they parade their atrocities around.
They beheaded a child. They beheaded a child.
I don't know what else you need beyond that. They put Alawite civilians in cages and used them as human shields on video because they were proud of this.
And what did the State Department? I think the State Department said something about the beheaded child, and I retweeted it the other day. It was like, oh, what, you think like one beheaded child is means that the rebels aren't moderate or something? It's like, what?
It's like it was one incident, and it's like they're investigating it. I think at one point that was like, well, they were like, well, they're investigating it, and we're no longer arming that group. It's like, well, every group works together.
Yeah.
Like, they just have different names for like whatever faction. One thing that was really, really struck me about Syria is a lot of the, especially in progressive circles, a lot of the discourse that's been popularized around Palestine, which is good discourse. Like, there's an occupation. Israel's a settler colonial state. It's occupying Palestinians. Palestinians have the right to resist. And, like Gaza, it's not fair to always go after just Hamas. And like, also Israel's lying. Hamas doesn't, we don't have any evidence Hamas uses human shields, yada, yada. A lot of that discourse has been projected onto Syria in a way that just doesn't fit. But yet it still gets used. Like, you've got people equating the rebel groups to Hamas. I'm like, well, I've never seen Hamas post videos of like beheading people. I've never seen Hamas use human shields. And also, I don't support Hamas. Like
yeah, exactly.
I think that like Hamas has a right to like protect its people, but I think it's like an oppressive religious group. I don't necessarily support them.
No, yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. This idea that they're trying to equate the two, and the implication is, well, obviously, since you think Israel is bad and they're occupying, you, by definition, support Hamas. Well, no, I actually don't. So what are you saying?
But then in the context of Syria, it's like the Syrian army is not occupying anything. That's the state.
Right.
Like, that's the Syrian state. And actually, in fact, like on the other side, you've got foreign fighters, like no other, just so many foreign fighters actually occupying people's neighborhoods. There's one girl I spoke to who is living in Damascus now, and she actually protested in Aleppo in 2012. She was a university student. There was a few university protests in Aleppo against the government. And she now supports the government winning. And she also feels like it's her fault, which isn't fair because it's like not your fault. You should be able to protest without like jihadists taking over.
Yeah.
But essentially her village in Idlib was taken over last year by rebel factions. And she went back to go visit her family. And then after she saw what the rebels had done there, she was like, we're getting you out of here. We can't live here. Basically, every neighborhood, she explained, was like run and taken control of by a different group from a different country. So like one was a Pakistani group. Another was a French group of jihadists. Another neighborhood, it was like, I think Kazakhstan like had a group that something. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And she was really annoyed and frustrated because on the wall of a neighborhood, the group would write their name in Arabic, and like write things on the walls. to represent themselves, and it was always in terrible Arabic. And she was really pissed off because she's like, you guys don't even know how to write in the language. Like, you don't even know how to speak the language here. And she was especially pissed off about the French because she was like, Syrians are dying trying to get to France, and there's a bunch of French assholes like coming to Syria to kill Syrians. Like, that is what we empowered. Like, we empowered a bunch of like, and Turkey, that's what Turkey allowed into Syria, is all these people from around the world came in and like took over people's neighborhoods and made the women, you know, like Saudi Arabia style or like Taliban style, like ISIS style, actually. If anything, these groups are like competition to Saudi Arabia. There's not really much difference between how they behave and the Saudis. But yeah, like they forced women to dress head to toe. They like, you know, start punishing people in the middle of like this, whatever the area is in the middle of the community. In her neighborhood, they called it Slaughter Square. They renamed it Slaughter Square, where they would like whip people and lash people and sometimes kill them for like adultery or sorcery or whatever, you know. And so that's so like when you go to government areas of Syria, they're so mad at the U.S. Like more than anyone else, they're pissed off at the U.S., Saudi Arabia, and Turkey and Qatar, because like to them, these countries basically through like mercenaries, through jihadist mercenaries, invaded their country and tried to like oppress them in the most violent, atrocious 16th century way you can imagine.
You said it yourself that when the U.S. and our allied groups took back Mosul from ISIS in Iraq, the way the media covered that in the U.S. versus the way the media covered it when the Syrian army, backed by Russia, took back parts of Aleppo. Like, the fucking hysteria and misleading garbage that was written about that compared to how straightforward and accurate it was about Mosul. That tells you everything. That's all framed through the geopolitical lens and framed through that like giant chessboard theory of we got to be against the Syrian government because they're aligned with Russia, they're aligned with Iran, and we want to topple them. And okay, so how are we going to frame this? I don't know. Say the genocidal government took back. It was killing victims and all. There was no evidence of any of that. They're slaughtering them. They're going in their homes and slaughtering them. And then meanwhile, you trace it back and you find out that a lot of the people making these fucking claims were so-called journalists who operated freely in former Nusra. Excuse me, they changed their name because they were fucking Al Qaeda to Arar al-Sham. You know, former Nusra territories for years. Like, you don't operate as a journalist in Nusra territory for years unless you're doing their fucking propaganda. And then one of them they had on CNN International. They had this guy on CNN, and he's just casually giving his account of it. It's like, hey, asshole, you're talking to the equivalent of Osama bin Laden right now about, you know, what's going wrong in Syria and what side are the good people.
That guy Bilal Abdul Karim, his name is, and he in particular, it's hilarious because he has actually gone out of his way to say that if Syrians want Islamist rule, we have to allow them. I'm like, who? You're like some dude from Brooklyn. You're not even Syrian. Yeah. You're like some Muslim convert who like operates he reports from Al Qaeda territory. It's unbelievable.
And that's such a stupid thing to say. Like, oh, that's like saying, oh, if the Germans want fascist rule, what are you gonna do? You let them have fascist rule?
Yeah.
Like, what is that? What do you mean? Like, you're saying let's give them the democratic choice to throw democracy out the window and fucking be a giant theocracy police state.
You know what's really screwed up about the U.S. policy in Syria is it actually helped ISIS. Like, U.S. policy in Syria, because who's the most organized army to take on ISIS? It is the Syrian army. Of
course, yeah.
Right? And so by funding groups, even if they were like moderates, let's pretend that they weren't Al-Qaeda. So let's pretend they were moderate groups. By funding
FSA, factions of the FSA.
Yeah, by funding the even moderate groups, by funding any groups to be fighting the only organized army in that country as ISIS is taking territory, you are literally diverting the only army able to take on ISIS. You're diverting them away from fighting ISIS. Every time the U.S. or its allies ramped up the support for the rebels, ISIS gained territory. And it's because the Syrian government would then have to go fight Al-Qaeda over here.
Yeah. And I love the conspiracies too. I remember like maybe a year into the war getting into a Twitter argument with somebody who claimed to be a journalist on the ground in Syria, and he was like, oh no, actually Assad and ISIS are allies. I'm like, wait, what? What the fuck are you talking about? He's like, yeah, no, they're on the same side. I'm like, that's just not true. Like, what are you talking? And he's lecturing me, and he was an Arab guy, and like he pulled the card of like, you white privileged fucking this, that. I'm like, what? I'm just saying that they're fighting each other because that's what every fucking credible piece of news says. Like, what do you mean? Like, it's not privileged to point out a fact.
Like, there's also like the whole thing that Russia's never fought ISIS. I'm like, actually, yeah. Like, look at Palmyra. Like,
Yeah.
it's just the stories people have spun to. It's like the people are just so concerned with maintaining a narrative. Like, it's like you were able to evolve your analysis of Syria the more information you got.
Right.
Same with me. But there are a lot of people. Once they have this narrative, it's all about maintaining the narrative.
Yeah.
And so the stories people have spun to try and maintain this narrative about Syria, from blaming Assad for like ISIS existing or al-Nusra existing because he let people out of prison, you know?
When he did that as a concession, he conceded to the rebels. The rebels said, release them. And he was like, okay, if this makes you calm down, here.
Yeah, like that's literally what happened. And like, I mean, it's also just like you think like Assad's like, you think the Syrian government's so diabolical and just like, oh, like we want.
He offered them amnesty. Assad offered rebels amnesty before the battle in Aleppo. He was like, if you drop your guns, I'll give you amnesty.
Well, a lot of people took it. A lot of like the less like, so there's like a spectrum of like violent jihadist groups, right? There's some people who are locals who they just got involved with it when it started, and now it's like, well, I don't want to go back because I'll probably get tortured because they might.
Yeah.
But now there's been this whole amnesty thing that's been in play, and in other parts of Syria and in Aleppo, the less extreme of the groups and more local people, like who are actually Syrian, have put down their arms and they want to be reintegrated back into society. And that is an option. I'm not saying that the government's perfect, but that is what's happening in other parts. Nobody wants to cover this. Like, nobody wants to even publish articles about it, but it is happening. And there are also, so what's actually like, what's left now, the people who are fighting back still is mostly Nusra and like the most hardcore jihadist factions.
How long? I mean, I saw articles going back a while now that basically claim that the FSA is like no longer even a thing.
Oh, it hasn't been for a long time. You know what happened is like with the FSA, a lot of the people who ended up joining, like the U.S. was literally like, we will pay you salaries.
Yeah. They got like 4 people, literally.
And like a lot of those people, like the ones they were most excited about were people who defected from like the Syrian army.
Yeah.
They hung out for a day and then dipped out and went into like live in Qatar and took the money and ran.
Right. Yeah.
So like it wasn't like in some cases like the U.S. was just offering a paycheck and some people took it. Like it wasn't necessarily that everybody. Like, I don't know that the FSA would have ever existed or it wouldn't have naturally come together if there wasn't some incentives put out.
Right.
Like, so it wasn't this, like, natural out of its own,
Yeah. You know, it wasn't an organic, moderate uprising to fight for freedom and democracy.
Right. And there were, and, like, to be fair, like, in 2011, there were protests, like, in the cities, there were protests that were calling for democracy and reform. There were also protests, and this is another story. People want to tell themselves it was purely, like, idealistic from the beginning. It's like, well, it was a mix. There was some protests, a lot of younger people who like, they're like, we want, more freedom of speech. We want more democracy.
Right, yeah.
A lot of like middle class people and even upper middle class were a part of these. And then you also had protests in some more rural areas, the more conservative areas where you had calls for like, I think one of them was like Alawites to the grave, Christians to Beirut, like things like this. Yeah. Like, and there was people firing, like there was like police buses were bombed and police stations were attacked in the beginning in these areas. So it wasn't necessarily like peaceful across the board. And that's not to say the government didn't, hit back super hard. And it's not to excuse whatever violence the state meted out. But it's just to say, like, we have to be honest about what happened.
And now what side are those well-meaning people who wanted democracy on? Across the board, they're on the side of the government. And,
or if they're not, they left the country, like because they couldn't be they were chased out by rebels, like they were killed. A lot of these people were either, so it's really sad, if you do want. And now what I get from people who still are like they want to be in opposition to the government, they want more freedom in Syria, they want more political freedoms. These kinds of people, what they told me, and I met with some of them, the ones that you didn't, like, they never get interviewed by the New York Times. I don't know why, but like they do consider themselves the opposition inside Syria to the government, and they're like, look, like as long as we've got a bunch of violent religious fanatics roaming around our country and we're at war, like these conditions are not like ideal to push for reform. Like it's going to be it's really hard to push for more freedom and change when you've got this like security situation taking place. So for them, if people really want to support a more democratic Syria, the first priority should be ending the violence. And, ending the funding stream and the training and the, the weapons that are going to these rebel groups. That should be the first priority, not trying to topple the government and replace it with like some Wahhabist, ideology, or even worse, like Libya, where it's just completely lawless and like there's no security for anybody.
Right. Yeah. All right, Rania, I hate to cut us short, but I am literally about to piss my pants.
Oh, God, I'm so sorry.
I've been squirming for like 20 minutes, like, this is a good conversation, but I really have
so
to pee.
Strong! All right, sorry for the rambling. Thank you so much for having me on.
No, this was great. I had a lot of fun, and hopefully, I think the audience was enlightened on a lot of stuff. Super badass that you went to Syria in the first place, and it sucks that you've been getting just viciously smeared for what you did, so... But I think that, people recognize that you really do care about the facts and you're trying your best and you have quality reporting. I read a lot of your stuff. I read your thing you sent me yesterday with how the U.S. media has covered it, and it's spot on. So thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Great to be on.
All right, Rania.
All right. So are we done recording?